Hello, welcome to the Citrus Garden. If you're new here, my name is Christina. If you're not new here, hi, welcome back. It's good to see you. This is a pick a card reading. The intention of these readings is to explore the energies that you may be experiencing for this week. So it is sort of meant to be for 1 week from when I post it. But for this week, for some reason, like the last week's pick a card reading kind of feels like it hasn't entirely played out yet. So it feels like that the energy of last week's pick a card reading feels like it's very much related to this one. So if you haven't watched that one, I'll link it at the end of this video so you can take a look at it. But anyways, so keep that in mind. If you did watch that one, it kind of feels like those energies are still present. But I am gonna do like an update, or just like doing this reading as if you haven't watched that one. So they're gonna be completely separate readings, but it does feel like that energy is still present, if that makes sense. So for these pick a card readings, I pick an overall theme using the cards. So we're using this alchemy deck, which I've been loving so far. So we have the Virgin's Milk and the Rotation. So what this card talks about is that there may have been like some aspect of your life where there's perhaps like an inexperience, or like a vulnerability, or just like a naivety or a purity, where it's kind of just, but in that there's kind of like the emphasis on the vulnerability, where there may have been sort of a reluctance to reveal this sort of lack of experience, is kind of how that's coming through. And it brings in this energy of like acting as if, right? Or like faking it until you make it kind of energy. And so I feel like this is the central sort of energy of this week, is that there's an area of your life perhaps where there is sort of a lack of experience on your part. But I feel like because it's coming out with this rotation card, is that that's shifting in this week. That's the energy that's shifting, where, especially with this card, it brings in this energy, and with the other cards surrounding it as well, of something that once felt like an impossibility, or just like something that's like that wasn't possible before, is now shifting with the rotation card, because this is very much a Wheel of Fortune kind of energy. And then you have here Uranus, which is also that energy of like something impossible is now becoming possible. It's some sort of new inspiration, some sort of, I want to say like surprise or inspiration of some sort. But especially with this card as well, the Alchemical Wedding, which came out at the bottom of the deck. So this is sort of the overall context, is that something impossible, or something that was once impossible, is now becoming possible. That's the overall theme of this reading this week, where it kind of feels like an arrival of something, right? An arrival of new energy, perhaps. It was coming through kind of as like a surprise of some sort, especially with the Alchemical Wedding. That feels like a celebration. That's what this card talks about. Uniting opposites, right? Or making something that was once a challenge or an impossibility is now becoming possible in some form. And this Alchemical Wedding was specifically feeling like celebration with others, right? So it feels very much like there's something that's like working out now that perhaps wasn't aligned before, is kind of how this is feeling. The example that came through with all of these cards today, is actually like, has to do with this deck that I'm using, because I actually got this deck like probably about 8 months ago, right? And when I used it sort of sporadically on the channel, but when I first started using it, it made me feel like this, right? The Virgin's Milk, which was like, I had no idea what I was doing, is kind of how I felt when I first got this deck, right? It was kind of just like this energy of like all the cards I was pulling made me feel like I had still so much work to do, kind of thing. Like I was getting all the cards that were telling me that I had a lot of work to do. That's what what that energy was. And so I put this deck aside for 8 months, right? Just to sort of like work on my other decks, to like explore other ventures, that kind of thing. But then, I don't know, like last week or something, I guess, when I started using this deck, I had a dream. That's what the Uranus energy. I had a dream that said, okay, now you're ready for this, is kind of how this is feeling. So it could be something like something from your past. I don't know, maybe 8 months ago, but it doesn't have to be. That I feel like the timing of that doesn't matter necessarily, but something of the past that you perhaps tried to make work earlier, but it's like you weren't ready for it, or the opportunity wasn't ready in some way. There was some more experience needed, perhaps, in order for you to get the full experience, maybe. But now it's like, now you're ready, or now this opportunity is ready. Something that was once impossible or difficult or uncomfortable is now possible, and is going to be a feeling of like celebration and like liveliness, right? It's a very light-hearted kind of joy that's coming in this week, which is really lovely. So I'm going to end it there for the overall theme. We're going to go into the individual groups, and you'll find the timestamps in the description box below. So for group 1, we have the Wise Salt. For group 2, we have the Glass. And for group 3, we have Gold. So I'm going to hold up all 3 groups at the same time so you can compare. So we have group 1, group 2, and group 3. Timestamps are in the description box below. Hi group 1, let's get started with your reading. So we're starting off here with the Sugar card, which is really interesting because it kind of feels like this. I'm not sure if this is a past energy or like the energy that you'll be working with. It kind of feels like you will be working with the sugar, which is just generally representing like very simple pleasures, right? Sweetness, that kind of thing. Because I feel like there's been some aspect of your life that has actually become a little bit clouded with the Ash card, and it's also coming out with this Memories card. That's what this Ash card represents specifically. Memories from the past, right? And it's become, some aspect of your life, I want to say, has become a bit clouded with memories of some sort. And it's coming out here with the Commander card, which is really interesting because this is the King of Pentacles, right? Which is talking about like perhaps there's an area of your life, could be work related from the past, perhaps, that was perhaps very rigid or like followed a strict routine. Because it's coming in with the Commander, I'm just thinking of like sort of like an army base, right? Like where you have to get up at a certain time. There's all of these rules that you need to follow. There's like an order or like a hierarchy or something like that. So it could have been something like that, or just a situation. Perhaps there's a situation that's very, very rigid in some way, right? But because it's coming out with Ash and Memories, it feels like a past thing, like memory. It's almost now coming in with like complex PTSD of some sort, maybe. Especially because it's coming in with all of this sort of like some sort of fiery energy that passed, right? There could be some cloudiness within your energy, or your vision is kind of how this is coming through, or your ability to create perhaps, or something like that. That's just causing cloudiness in some way. It could be related to a King of Pentacles of some sort. And what I love coming out next here are these 3 cards. So you have the Ace of Cups, right? The Ace of Lotuses, which is so beautiful. And then the 4 of Birds and the Weaver. So I will get into the Ace of Cups in a moment, but this 4 of Birds and the Weaver, 4 of Birds talks about taking a rest. But like, I actually read the description in the guidebook for this one today, which I don't normally do, but this was coming through, or like this was being described as like an observatory, right? So it's kind of bringing in this energy of like your vision, your far vision, or like your ability to make plans perhaps, right? Especially with the Weaver, because this talks about sort of like intention setting and manifesting with intention, right? Like making plans, because I feel like there's something here in your energy where perhaps there was because of a past event, something like that, right? Some sort of memory that perhaps was difficult, was clouding your vision or your ability to see forward, right? Or to look forward, or even to like connect with simple pleasures, right? It could just be like your memory was clouded, or you were stuck in the past in some way, or there was some sort of like, perhaps even for maybe one of you, like some sort of response of like a complex PTSD moment, which could encompass so much, right? There's so much in there. But what I really love about this is that you have here the Ace of Lotuses and the Uncreated, which I really love, because how this Uncreated card was looking like today was actually just like a drop of water, right? Like just a refreshing drop of water is kind of how this is feeling. But with the Ace of Lotuses, it's coming in with all of this sort of like an overflow of unconditional love is kind of how this is feeling. And as a result of that, it's washing away all of this ash. Because if you've ever for example, when I like burn Palo Santo, right? Like if I spill some ash on my table, for example, and then you try and wipe it away, it just smears, right? It becomes more of a mess if you do it like that. So you actually have to use like water or moisture in order to clean it properly. And that's how I'm seeing this energy today. And then what's so incredible is that after here you have the Wise Salt. So this was at the bottom of the deck. So how I'm seeing this, because if you look at all of this like rainbow light, it's like this drop of water or this overflow of unconditional love is coming in to clear that telescope again, right? To clear out something that was causing all of this, like the blockage of your vision, perhaps. And so all of this sort of rainbow light is now coming through. The Wise Salt also comes in with this energy of like preservation. So, but also like lessons and wisdom, right? Something that took a lot of grit and perseverance, because again, the whole theme of this is like something where perhaps there was, an energy of like, especially with the virgin's milk, this one always kind of comes in with this energy of like not wanting others to know about whatever, lack of experience or something like that, right? It's something that you want to keep hidden, right? So it could be something that there's perhaps some aspect of this past memory that you were keeping hidden, or perhaps even was hidden from you in some aspect, is now being cleaned off. And it's like you're seeing perhaps the lessons that you learned in that process, whatever that was, or you're gaining the wisdom, right? Something that took a lot of grit and perseverance. There's this also energy of like, perhaps there's some sort of elder or like someone with wisdom who's coming to give you something, or give you a clarity of some sort, right? So it could be something like a teacher or a mentor, or like a therapist maybe, who's giving you the ability to gain the lesson or the perspective that is needed from this situation, is kind of how this is feeling, so that you can reconnect with your forward vision. And I want to say reconnect with the sweetness or the simple pleasures of life, or something like that, right? Something that's very like uplifting and positive, and that it brings you joy again, right? That's all. The joy was a really important sort of, it's a lightening of the spirit is kind of how this is feeling. Okay, and what's really interesting as well is that you have here the Mars card, which is very much kind of like, I feel like very traditional Mars energy is this commander energy, right? Like the war general kind of energy, that kind of thing. What's interesting is that Mars is actually transiting this week, at the end of this week on the 25th. It's moving into Cancer, which is a really interesting energy because Mars in Cancer is very traditionally known as being sort of like a very a not favorable sign for Mars, because Mars is very much about forward action, right? Like taking action, moving forward very quickly, your drive, your perseverance, all of that sort of like very commander-like energy. But Mars in Cancer is much softer, right? It's much softer. It's all of this sort of like taking time to perhaps rest and like clear off the dirt or the debris from your direction forward, perhaps, right? Like perhaps gaining some sort of, or like setting a new intention perhaps about the direction that you're going in, right? Perhaps just needing to take a time out with the Four of Birds, right? The Four of Swords is sort of traditionally that sort of rest energy. And what's really interesting as well with this uncreated card, which I didn't talk about yet, is this card talks about something that is yet to be born, right? Like having some sort of inspiration to create something, right? Because I feel like, especially if you've been in an energy where, if there has been any sort of like perhaps like complex PTSD or depression even, maybe in those energies it can be very difficult to look forward or to create or to feel sort of lightness or joy or anything like that, right? It can impact your ability to look towards the future. But I feel like with this coming in, it's rejuvenating that, right? It's allowing you to look to the future, perhaps have hope or have a vision or have some sort of inspiration to create something, is kind of how this is feeling, which is really lovely because, again, you have here the air card. So this card I often talk about as sort of like receiving a care package. So that could be something for you this week. But today it was also kind of looking like, cause it's a person in an air balloon, right? Or like, is that the right word? Anyways, they're up high, right? Having some sort of new perspective, perhaps being able to look back on the past or look back on the memories of some sort, that allows you to gain some sort of new perspective on whatever that situation or the memories or the past relationships were. But this was also coming through with the energy of having like a fresh breath of air. That's what this is talking about, which is really lovely. And then you have here the Two of Embers, which today was actually coming through with like very traditional kind of Two of Wands energy of making plans. Again, with the Weaver, right? I feel like you'll be making a lot of new plans or setting new intentions with this like clarity of vision is what's coming through. And it was also one line from the book that was sticking out to me for this was leaving home. So whatever that means for you, I feel like there could be something where some aspect of where you've grown comfortable, but perhaps are needing to expand is changing for you. That might be shifting. And what I really love next, so you have here the Saturn, which is talking about, like, Saturn traditionally talks about like lessons, right? Gaining lessons or perhaps there were specific challenges. But it talks, and also discipline is coming through as well. But I feel like this is what it is that you are gaining, right? This is the overall energy where it's like you're gaining the wisdom. You've gained the lesson. You've gained some sort of understanding, perhaps. But the Saturn energy is also bringing in something long-term, is kind of how this is feeling, something long-term. Because the next two cards to come out, which I really love, they didn't come out in this order, but I'm putting them together like this, is the Three of Trees and the Four of Trees. So if you don't know this about this deck, is that all of the element like the ace of, or like the trees, right? That's the earth element in this deck. All of the cards lead into one another, right? So they create a full picture. And I feel like this is the first time that I'm actually showing this in one of the readings, where you can clearly see that that these two make a complete picture, right? The 3 of trees and the 4 of trees, which is so beautiful. This is probably like the most beautiful combination of cards in this deck, for me anyway. But the 3 of trees talks about an introduction of some sort of new element that actually reshapes or reforms the landscape, right? To make it more fertile, or to make it more productive, or to just increase the amount of, I don't know, productivity is what's coming through, but it doesn't have to be that. Increase the amount of yield. I'm not sure. It's because it's coming in with all of this like sort of farm energy. It could be just like introducing some new element that brings more peace, for example, because it's highlighting sort of the lavender, which is a very calming energy. Could be like you're getting more sleep, or like there's just more peace is kind of how this is feeling, right? A lot more steadiness, a lot more perhaps inner peace, right? The ability to create something. And then this 4 of trees to me talks about like the most idyllic dream that you have, that you want to create. It's coming in with very much like a long-term kind of process or creation that's coming into being. So this week might be the start of something that's going to bring you into a very long-term, stable energy in the future, right? It could be something that grows over time, is kind of how this is feeling. But what you're working with very much is this wise salt, right? Some sort of wisdom that you've gained is now allowing you to create something that is long-term. All right, group 1. I'm going to end the reading there. If this message resonated with you, please consider subscribing, liking, or leaving a comment. I've also opened up a website if you're interested in personal readings. You can find all of the information and more in the description box below, so please check that out. Thank you so much for sharing your energy with me, and I hope you have a great week. Bye. Hi group 2, welcome to your reading. So we're going to start off here with the synchronicity card, which is really interesting because I feel like the synchronicities for you that may be happening for you this week, it kind of feels like they're going to be really subtle, or just like it's just emphasizing to pay attention to what it is that you're noticing, because it could be that your attention is being drawn to like specific things. It could be like names, certain symbols, maybe certain colors, or whatever it is, however it is that you communicate with like the universe and your spirit guides. Like it's just wanting to emphasize that, especially because you have here the intuition card. So like one example of this that I actually experienced yesterday was this, like I saw the same name 3 times yesterday, which I thought was very strange, because there was something in common with all of that, like not just the name, but also perhaps like the personality of the person, or like the story that was associated with that name. There was something synchronistic about that, right? And there's something perhaps wanting to be shown to you about that situation, or about perhaps a past situation, or what is to come as well, that you may be getting indications or signs of, especially in this week for you. What's really interesting here is that the cards that are coming out, you have here the past lives and the 5 of birds. And this is also coming out with the insects. So the insects I talk about as being, so this might be a synchronicity, right? Like some sort of, perhaps you're noticing a lot of insects, or just like image, it could be images, right? It doesn't have to be the actual insect itself. But the thing about insects is that they inherently have this energy of discomfort about them, right? So it could be that the synchronicities that you're experiencing may cause discomfort in some area of your life, perhaps in terms of like because there's this energy here of humility coming in twice, because you have here the trees, which also talks about that, like things like spiders can make even very like strong people very uncomfortable, or very like brave people very uncomfortable, right? Like that kind of thing, where there's like something very small, something very it just feels, it's just like small or unnoticeable, something about details perhaps that can have this effect of being very uncomfortable to, or like disproportionately uncomfortable is kind of how this is feeling. And to emphasize that, we have like the past lives and the 5 of birds. So I feel like this 5 of birds is actually a past event, right? It's that thing, again, with, there's so much discomfort in this energy this week, where it's kind of like this past thing that you perhaps, I want to say it perhaps has to do with creativity, because that's a theme that's coming in with this reading. It could also have to do with like a specific partnership as well, because what's coming in here with the 5 of birds is this energy of like conflict, perhaps from a past life or just in your past, right? The past life just talks about like all of the experiences that you've had, whether in this life or in a past life, that has brought you to this current moment right now. And I feel like there's something here in your past, just leaving that broadly, where there was some sort of conflict, where perhaps you, in engaging in this conflict, something was lost, is kind of how this card comes through, where it's kind of like, it was kind of coming through with the energy of like win at all costs, or perhaps there was an element of pride, or perhaps like not willing to let go of something, or whatever it is. I feel like everyone has experience with this energy where it's like you perhaps not like wanting to be right? Like wanting to win the fight at all costs kind of thing. And because of that, something more important, I want to say, was lost in that conflict, right? Because perhaps you or another person were both so determined to be right, perhaps, that like there was loss ultimately, is kind of how this is feeling. And it's also coming out with this card, the antimony, which is really interesting, because this is the energy of like almost like it, because antimony is a very corrosive substance, and so it's kind of like everything that this touches is corroded. So so that's sort of the negative or the shadow aspect of this card, right? Where it's like going too far, or whatever it is, something like that, right? Perhaps being so determined or so focused on some aspect of whatever it is of the conflict that you went too far, or somebody went too far, or something went too far that led to loss of some sort. But what's really interesting here is that the next 2 cards that are coming out, because this card also talks about creativity, that when this card comes out, the best way to deal with this energy is to channel it through your creativity in some way, right? Like to I don't know, like create something, right? And it's coming out here with the cosmic tree and the protector card. So this protector card, this is the King of Wands in this deck, but in the guidebook today, the line that was popping out to me specifically was heightened creativity, right? That any sort of project that you may be doing right now or taking on in this week has an energy of protection about it, that it is protected, that your creative projects are going to work out very successfully, and that you should dive deeper into your creative projects, which is what the antimony card talks about, which is, it's very much like an energy of like, once you begin something, you just keep going, and it's kind of like a never, like, just like full steam ahead kind of energy. That's what both of these cards are talking about. So something to do with your creativity or a creative project of yours is going to be going full steam ahead this week, perhaps for you. And it's like, I feel like it's being highlighted here, especially with this cosmic tree, because this is the Hermit card, but I sort of associate this with sort of like spiritual or ancestral wisdom. Like you have access to all of your past lives. You have access to all of your ancestors' wisdom, that kind of thing, especially when you're in hermit mode. And because it's coming out with the protector, it's like, I feel like they're in this time where after this conflict, I feel like there was this opportunity here for you to be in the hermit mode, right? To learn something, to integrate some aspect of like an uncomfortable energy, because conflict is unavoidable, I want to say. With this protector card, it talks about getting out ahead of it. So it could be something like, in the past, you tried to start some sort of creative project, for example, but perhaps it didn't work out because you were focused on the wrong thing, is kind of how this is coming through, right? You were focused on the wrong thing, and because of that, there was a loss of a project or a venture or whatever it is. Something that you tried to do didn't work out because perhaps you were focused on the wrong thing. But now that thing is coming back. The opportunity to engage in that project or whatever it is coming back with the synchronicity card, because you've gained wisdom. And it's like, perhaps that conflict, right? That difficult energy is perhaps still there in some way, but because you're coming out this protector card, it's like you're protected in this process, perhaps even just because you have the wisdom that you will be going up against this. And so it's like now you can actually successfully move through it with more ease. It's kind of how this is feeling, because it's kind of like this energy here, the antimony, is like once you start, there's no stopping, is kind of how this is feeling. So I feel, which is really interesting. And I feel like that's the energy, because it kind of feels like the energy where it was like a naivety before is now something like you actually have to push through whatever this conflict is in order to get to the success, is kind of how this is feeling. Okay. And then we have here next, so the smoke card, which is the overall energy of the reading. This was at the bottom of the deck, because I feel like there's something here about like there's a fire somewhere, right? And it could be something like, with the synchronicity, you may be experiencing some sort of smoke signal, right? Like some sort of very subtle sign or synchronicity that's alerting you to a potential conflict in the future, or potential energy of discomfort in the future that you will have to face. But it's like it's preparing you for it, because once you go down this path, once you answer sort of this call towards creativity, there's no stopping, right? It's like you have to get through whatever this conflict is that perhaps in the past you weren't willing to engage with, or there was loss, or perhaps there was a defeat of some sort, maybe. But what's really interesting here is that you have here the iron and the glass card, which are really interesting, because this iron card, first of all, is bringing in this energy of Mars. Again, in group 1, Mars was also an energy. And so in that, just a heads up for those who don't know, Mars is moving into Cancer at the end of this week. So that might be an interesting, like, because of that shift, perhaps that might be helping in this process a little bit, because anyways, I don't know. I feel like that'll be a specific way in which you engage with that. But more importantly, it is bringing the energy of Mars, but more importantly, it's bringing in this energy of strength or reliability, or the things that you rely on, or the things that you build with as well. Because the glass is almost like the opposite of that, right? This is a very strong energy, an energy that is able to withstand a lot of perhaps pressure or force, or like that's why we use it to build, right? Because it's very reliable, it's very strong. Whereas the glass is very fragile, right? If you were to put any sort of force on glass that the iron can withstand, the glass would shatter. So there's this interesting aspect of like these two opposites. I feel like there's something here for you where you're being asked to sort of merge these two elements of self, like extreme strength and also extreme fragility, which is really interesting. And just to emphasize that whole idea, we have here the Peacock card, which is the Empress in this deck. So, because it does talk about nurturing, but more importantly, the message that came through with this card is the merging of opposites, right? Which is absolutely tied in with the entire theme of this reading of something impossible being made possible. But for you specifically in this group, it feels much more of like a merging of opposites, and it kind of feels like perhaps it's a resolving of a conflict of some sort, because you have here again with the Protector, right? It implies that there's some sort of conflict. It's getting out ahead of the conflict. It's like because you perhaps are anticipating perhaps some sort of fiery energy or an exchange of some sort, you can kind of work through that because you're prepared for it, is kind of how this is feeling. But then you have the Two of Lotuses right after it, which is really lovely because this talks to me. This is a card of like unity and partnership and connection, but also specifically intimacy, right? Like intimacy with like a friend. It's about closeness. It's about like conversation. So these two things coming in together are really interesting, this is the iron, this is the glass, right? This is the strength aspect, right? Like perhaps the conflict or Mars like going up against somebody versus working together with them, right? There's this interesting sort of blend because it kind of feels like you need both, right? It's kind of feeling like there's a merging of those two opposite energies in a very harmonious and balanced way, which is really interesting because I feel like here as well, there's something with the glass of perhaps there was something foggy or there was perhaps a misunderstanding of some sort that is now being cleared up, is kind of how this is feeling, or that there's clear direction forward. But it's also for me, like in this reading today, it's talking about like vulnerability, especially with this card, or intimacy, right? Like revealing all or something like that. There's a clarity that comes from this reveal, perhaps, of whatever the discomfort was in the past, which is really interesting. And then you have next the Uranus coming out again. So that's the overall theme, but specifically in this deck, it's bringing in this other energy of like Uranus is tipped on its like past 90 degrees on its axis, meaning it spins sideways. So it's bringing this energy of like unconventionality, revolutionary, like being very revolutionary, right? Like there's something very odd or eccentric about this perhaps dynamic, because it is specifically talking about a specific partnership, right? And it may not be, I don't know, it may be a specific partnership, a specific person that it is coming back, or there's like a reuniting is kind of how this is feeling. That's where the synchronicity is really important to sort of figure out who that might be for you, is kind of how that's feeling. But it's bringing in all this energy of like there's a significant change in the dynamic of whatever this relationship is. And then finally we have these two cards, the Seven of Trees and the Two of Trees, which is really interesting because these are also very opposite energies to me, where the Seven of Trees is kind of talking about like a farmer's market, right? Where when it's kind of bringing this energy of like when one person thrives, everybody thrives, right? Like when one person in the community is thriving, everybody in the community benefits from that. So this to me is talking very much about like perhaps community members or like people from your workplace, right? Like people, it could talk about working relationships. So it doesn't have to necessarily be like a romantic partner or like a friendship. This could be more so like a unity or coming together of people within a more broader community. Especially with the two trees, this talks about like the working relationship between earth and water, because in this landscape here, it's very dry. It's not necessarily an environment that would nurture growth with the two trees or these two sprouts kind of growing, but it actually takes sort of like work or somebody who's willing to perhaps go the extra mile and bring water to the dry earth, is kind of how this is feeling. So with the water, it's kind of bringing in this energy of healing, but it kind of feels like one, or perhaps there's a concerted effort on both parts of whoever with this partnership is, where both people are willing to sort of go the extra mile to nurture this relationship or nurture this community, knowing that when one person thrives, everybody thrives, right? That's kind of the energy that's coming in here. So there may be some sort of shift within perhaps your energy, I want to say, where you are perhaps getting ahead of potential conflict, right? Because of your past experiences, that is allowing you to build or nurture a partnership so that everybody can thrive and benefit from it. That's kind of how it's feeling. Okay, group 2. I'm going to leave the reading there. If this message resonated with you, please consider subscribing, liking, or leaving a comment. I've also opened up my website if you're interested in a personal reading. You can find all the information in the description box below. Thank you so much for sharing your energy with me, and I hope you have a great week. Bye. Hi group 3, let's get started with your reading. So we're actually starting here with the Against Nature card, which is really interesting. Because it ties back to like the overall theme when I was talking about like when I first started using this deck. I kept pulling cards that were telling me that I had a lot of work to do on myself, and also just like about the situation and all that. And one of those cards was this card. This card came out where I was like, it talks about like trying too hard to control something or like a situation perhaps, right? Because it goes against nature, or it's kind of like, because there's this energy, of course. Like sometimes you do need to put in a lot of effort to like get something started, for example. Like it's kind of like taking on a bit of extra burden or a bit of extra work in order to make something progress, right? There's that energy. But this one talks to me about like trying too hard to force a situation that is very clearly not wanting to go in that direction, is kind of how that's feeling. And there's something really, it's coming in with this energy kind of like, for some reason, the colors of this card are really just uncomfortable for me, because it kind of feels, it just kind of reminds me of like rotten fruit for some reason. And so it's kind of like this energy of like trying to perhaps preserve something that really needs to go through a transition, or like really needs to go through an ending. And I feel like this is the past energy, right? Because we're talking about like something that perhaps was uncomfortable, that perhaps you were trying to control too much. And it's like this, I feel like that forced you in some way to put this energy aside, is kind of how this is feeling. You were asked basically in the past to surrender control of a situation that you were absolutely not in control of. And because of that, there's a shift in that energy, is kind of how this is feeling. So if we start off here with these cards, the Vessel and the Maze, which is really interesting because the Vessel is the Devil card, which again is talking about control, sort of. But it's kind of like trying to, because the Devil is the energy that controls us, is kind of how it was coming through. But today it was kind of coming through in with like this energy of like something that was deceptive, or something that was done for the wrong reasons, or something that was like on the surface seemed like a good option or something like that, but on the inside, right, there was something not quite right about it, is kind of how that's feeling, especially with the maze. So together, these two cards are actually bringing in this energy of Harry Potter in the fourth book, right? The Goblet of Fire, where there's the final trial or challenge was like they had to go find the trophy at the center of the maze. And of course that trophy was something that like led to really difficult situation for the characters involved, right? It was not as it seemed, is this vessel card, right? There was some sort of situation perhaps that was not as it seemed, and perhaps put you in this energy of the maze. This is the Temperance card, where it's kind of like you were asked to surrender or just like move through the situation as the best way that you could. But I feel like that's shifting now, right? There's something shifting here, and it kind of feels like what's really interesting here, the next card to come out is the Composer, which actually talks about, this is the Page of Cups, but it talks about like harmonizing with the universe, right? Going with the flow, or going with the natural momentum of a situation, perhaps, right? Instead of trying to force it and control it. Because imagine, so if you think about a composer in an orchestra, right? They're not the ones who are writing the music. The music's already been written. And if the composer was trying to overly control perhaps the tempo or like alignment of events, or like if they introduced an aspect or like something too early, the music would just sound terrible, right? It would be akin to like you know when you just hear two notes that just don't sound right together, like that's what this card brings in. And I feel like there was a situation in your past where there was this energy, just something was not harmonizing, it was just not right, and it's kind of like you just were asked to surrender. Because the next couple cards here are just so interesting. You have the Moon card, but you actually have the Moon card twice. So you have the Moon twice in this energy, which is really emphasizing to me like surrender, right? That, and also specifically cycles, right? Like there's a certain timing of events, right? Like the full moon and the new moon kind of cycles that are really important, that were really important, that are present tense really important. But it's also bringing in all this energy of like the subconscious, of things that are not in your control, of like sort of illusions and mystery, right? Things are not as they seem, which could work so many different ways, right? Because again, this is supposed to be an energy that's bringing in something new, that's lightening the load for you, or bringing in some sort of new inspiration. So there was a past situation that was absolutely not harmonious, that was not working. You were perhaps trying to force it or to control it too much. And it's like in surrendering that control, especially with the moon, releasing, right? Releasing any sort of control on the thing, just working through sort of the natural rhythms of whatever, the universe, it's shifting something. But what's really interesting here, because we are entering into the new moon in Aries coming up this week on the 19th or the 20th or something like that. But what's interesting is that we have another new moon in Aries, like in the third week of April or something like that, right? So in 4 weeks' time, there's going to be another new moon in Aries, which I feel like is not a very common occurrence. So because the moon is coming out twice, perhaps the next month or so will be a really interesting kind of energy of surrendering for you, where it's kind of like there may be a lot of difficulties or perhaps challenges, I want to say, or just like here with the dreams coming out and this Eight of Embers, right? A need to sort of just adapt to the situation that you're in and not fight against nature, or don't fight against the cycle or the natural movement or the momentum that this situation perhaps is wanting to go towards. Because when you are in line or harmonize with the universe, things just move more smoothly, is kind of how this is coming through today, which is really interesting. So with the dreams coming out, you could be experiencing things in your dreams that are kind of uncomfortable. It's kind of how this is feeling. It's bringing in all the subconscious energy. But what's interesting about dreams is that, for me anyway, how I experience it is that it's kind of like there's a detachment from the physical sensations in some way, right? Like things like smell, sight, hearing, touch, taste, the five senses with the vessel are detached in some way in the dream space, right? So, but what we do have in the dream space is a very sort of like third eye knowing, right? There's kind of just like a knowing, or more importantly, how you feel. There's all of this sort of, especially with the moon, it's coming in with a lot of emotions, right? So there may be an emphasis on in the next month, I want to say, for you, because it does feel like it's a longer term energy for this group, where there's an emphasis on how you feel, or how you are, an emphasis on your emotions, right? And how perhaps you move through that, or the emotions are going to be the thing that's guiding you in this week, is kind of how that's feeling, which is really interesting. But it's also talking about that if this against nature card is referencing a past event, right? You surrendered control in the past. It's kind of like what this is saying, what's coming out next here with the numbers and the new pearl and the pelican card as well, is that there is enough time has passed, is kind of how that's feeling. Enough time has passed in order for you to have gained the pearl, because this card was coming in with this energy of like, it talks about grit and perseverance, and also irritation, right? Like the pearls are created from irritation and difficulty. But it's not an active process. That's what this is talking about. For a pearl to be created, all you need is time and salt water, right? Like that's the only thing that you need. So there could have been tears. That could be, especially with salt water and the moon, right? So there could be emotional energies being stirred up in the next week or month, perhaps. Or it could be referencing a past event where there were a lot of tears shed or something like that. But now enough time has passed for the new pearl to be gained. And it's kind of like here, because this numbers card, so that numbers might be significant synchronicity for you, but it's kind of also talking about time passing, right? With the clock here, that enough time has passed. Or if it's talking about a current moment, that there's enough, that time is the only thing, that's time and emotional energy, right? With the cycles of releasing and restarting and releasing again, that might be the only thing that is necessary, or that will solve the problem, or something like that. That time and tears heal all wounds is what's coming through, right? There's something there about that. But anyways, I'm not sure. I'm inclined to say that this is a past event, right? That there's some situation in the past, right? That's the overall energy of the reading. But it could be that because the moon is coming in, it could be like you're re-experiencing it in some way, right? There's it's coming back again in order for you to like finally release it, or I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure. Again, with the two new moons, right? It may be something that was in the past that you're re-experiencing in order to release it, or to gain the wisdom, or like what it is that you've learned from the situation. I don't know. Especially with this pelican. So this card is the Emperor card in this deck, which again is talking about control, right? Something that you try to control or something like that. But in this deck specifically, it talks about releasing karmic debt, that perhaps whatever this situation was where there was too much control forced you into an energy. Again, I don't want to use the word force. Because there was a situation that it was outside of your control, you surrendered to perhaps emotional or subconscious kind of energies. And in that process, in that sort of very spiritual, receptive, surrendering to illusion, surrendering to mystery, all of that, it was actually a process of clearing some sort of karmic debt is what's coming through here. But what I really love here is, and I feel like that's what's releasing. Perhaps there's a releasing of some sort of karmic debt. Because what you have here next is the romantic. So this is the Knight of Cups. So very much a progression. So again, what I love about these cards is that the cards all link together. But anyways, there's this energy of progression from the Page to the Knight of Cups. But this one is much more going with the flow, right? It's kind of, especially emphasizing the boat, is perhaps honoring your emotions, right? Going with the flow of your emotions is kind of how that's feeling. Doing things that you feel like doing, which is harmonizing with the natural flow of universal energies and forces. It's not going against nature. This is very much a going with the flow of nature. I don't know how else to say that, but and then you also have here the Gold card. So if you think about alchemy, right, just like the traditional meaning of alchemy, it's trying to turn lead into gold. So this is very much a culmination energy. This was at the bottom of the deck, which is the overall energy of your reading today. So again, I feel like this is emphasizing that if there's been a situation in the past that you were trying to over control or trying to force, because you surrendered to your emotions, right, the moon energy, and learned how to go with the flow, you've gained some sort of culmination, right? And it's not about, again, with the vessel as well, it's not about the perhaps materialistic, right? Because gold obviously is something of value, something that has physical value. So perhaps there was a situation in the past where perhaps you were doing it for the wrong reasons, or you were trying to force some sort of material outcome. But now it's kind of like the real value of the situation is not the vessel or materialistic or physical, perhaps, kind of wealth that's gained. It's much more an internal sort of knowing yourself energy. That's what comes through with this gold. And then what I love so much about this is that then you have here the crossroads, right? The crossroads, which is talking about a new choice that I feel like by the end of this process, however long it lasts, there will be a new choice for you. And then you have here the Wanderer, which is the Page of Wands, which is about sort of exploration, being able to take a new step. It's also a lot of fast movement forward. But with the crossroads, it's really emphasizing some sort of new direction, perhaps, or new choice that you're being given. And what I love is that you have the Death card, right? This is the Fool in this deck, right? The start, the beginning, a new beginning for sure for this energy. What's really interesting here because the numbers are a really significant synchronicity for you. But you have here the 31, which to me is emphasizing the end of the month, right? The end of the month. So the end of March might be significant, but it might also be emphasizing again sort of the second new moon that's coming in a month's time, right? In 4 weeks' time, something like that. I feel like for you, this energy is, so the 31st of March might be an interesting timing element, or in 4 weeks when we reach the second new moon in Aries, especially with the Death card, because Aries is very much the start, right? The Wanderer is very much an Aries energy, sort of starting new projects, making another choice. But I want to say that it's like this new choice that you're making is coming from a more informed place, where it's like you're not choosing things for perhaps the material gain or the material outcome or something like that, right? You're doing it more so for this like internal direction, or something that you've gained that talks about going with the flow, going with the natural forces, let's say, of the universe, or where it is that you're meant to be going, let's say. Okay, group 3, I'm going to end it there. If this message resonated with you, please consider liking, subscribing, or leaving a comment. I've also opened up my website if you're interested in a personal reading. Thank you so much for sharing your energy with me, and I hope you have a great week. Bye.